Welcome to the Rhiannon's podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon, and today I have a very special treat for you. This is the first video in my new series, Meet Your Makers. I've been wanting to do interviews with makers since I started this podcast, and I'm so excited to be able to realize this dream and share so many wonderful creators with you. Today's guest is Danielle, who is a longtime fiber artist and sometime YouTuber. She's going to share some of her wisdom and perspective on the fiber arts with us. So without further ado, let's get started. And Danielle, I like to start with the kind of obvious question, but tell us about your fiber journey. And so two parts to it. What fiber arts do you practice? And then the second part, when, how, and why did you start those?
Okay. Thanks for having me, Rhiannon. I'm really excited. So I learned how to knit. I would say I'm primarily a knitter when I was a kid, probably 7, 8 years old. I don't really specifically remember it, but I know it was my grandma who taught me. She knit for everybody. She knit baby blankets, scarves. Every single grandchild and great-grandchild got a blanket when they were born and on special occasions and in our favorite colors. So she taught me how to knit. She taught me how to cast on, knit, purl, bind off. So I made a lot of doll blankets, baby blankets, Barbie clothes, Barbie blankets. And at some point, my mom bought me a circular loom kit, really small size, like finger size. And I knit a lot of Barbie tube dresses in some really awesome Lurex yarn.
Fun.
Yes. And then I became, I would say, a capital K knitter in college. And then after, someone in my dorm was knitting and I could see, I was really excited to see her knitting. And I had forgotten about it. And I asked her if she could reteach me. And she taught me the knit stitch. And I made a long garter stitch scarf, gave it to my mom. She might still have it. And then my next project was another scarf, but this time I did it as a basket weave scarf. And I had to figure out how to do it. Either she taught me the purl or I remembered enough from what my grandma had taught me to do a knit and purl texture, except for I didn't know enough about knitting to be able to not increase my stitch count. So it started out square and then it quickly went wider and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I had to invent how to correctly move the yarn in between the front and the back so it wasn't a yarn over every time. So I learned how to do that. And I remember sitting down with some graph paper and mapping out what my scarf was going to look like. And it turned out great. I don't know what happened to it. It was acrylic. It wasn't something that was super nice. I mean, I really enjoyed knitting it. And then I knit a huge queen size blanket, also in Red Heart.
A queen size blanket?
Yes, it was real special.
Knitter.
It was before the time. I had a digital camera, but I definitely didn't have a digital camera on my phone, but it was real cool. It was striped white and then neon colors of the same colors as my quilt that was on my bed. And I also had some diamond shapes in knit and pearls that I designed myself. Okay. And it was a lot. Yeah. I do not have it. And I don't think I have any pictures of it. So that's a little disappointing.
Wow. I love that you mentioned making little Barbie clothes because I remember making little tiny Barbie clothes. Like I would sew tiny Barbie clothes and basically I would just put make a Barbie sandwich with fabric and then start sewing around. Like I didn't.
Yeah, and leave 2 holes for the arms.
But like just start. Yeah. So I know like so many people have that kind of like when I was little, I made little doll clothes and then you come back to it.
Absolutely. And I think that's awesome for kids just to be able to make something that they feel like they can use, because that's part of the joy of making is being able to use your thing. Like you want to be able to show it off or use it or do something with it. It's beautiful if you can just hang it on the wall, but it's so much better when you can use it.
Yeah. Okay, so I hear you also crochet and you do some other fiber related arts, crafts.
Yes. So I crochet and I have no idea how I learned how to crochet. I don't remember anybody teaching me how to crochet, but I know I knew how to crochet by the time I was in college because one of my roommates' friends was over all the time and she was really into crocheting. So I remember talking about it with her and I would knit and she would crochet. And I remember talking about how it was different because she made the same hat and scarf pattern over and over again. And I feel like that I started to learn the difference between knit and crochet because hers was so much stiffer and like not as elastic as the hats that I was able to make. And so I learned how to crochet then. I am definitely not a capital C crocheter. I enjoy crocheting. I love the finished product of the things I choose to crochet, but I don't enjoy the process as much. And it kind of hurts my arm a little bit sometimes. So I have to do it more slowly and in chunks.
Yeah. It sounds like knitting is kind of your primary and then you dabble in some crochet and other things. That's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also will do some cross stitching, some needlepoint, and all sorts of other types of crafts.
Cool. So what are you working on right now? Do you have any works in progress?
Yes, I have many. So I picked a couple that I wanted to share with you. So my first one is the Zoraya sweater by Justyna Lorkowska. I believe that's how you say her name. So this is what it looks like right now. And I'm more than halfway through the body. I am using Sincere Sheep Yarn Coastal, and it is a mix of wool, linen, and silk. Yeah. So you can see it is going to be really, I think it's going to be really beautiful. It's going to be nice and lightweight. So I'm going to be able to get a lot of wear out of it. It is February and right now it is, let me see, pretty warm here. It is 54 degrees. Oh, so okay. Yeah. I'm wearing a DK weight sweater right now and it's I'm pretty hot in it. So I'm looking forward to doing this. I'm doing a informal knit along with two of my local knitting friends as well.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a bottom up with a drop shoulder and I'm really excited. Yeah. And then this is the label for the yarn in case anybody's interested in it. So Sincere Sheep, she is a local-ish dyer. She's from Northern California. I live in Reno, Nevada. So in Northern Nevada, she's pretty close to me. And she does everything naturally dyed. And she's really aware of her sourcing. So almost everything that she does is the sheep are American sheep. They are milled in America. And then she dyes it in Northern California.
Cool. Okay. And we can link all of that stuff too. We'll just put it in the description box. So people can see again, the pattern and the designer and all of that stuff. Cause I think that's really cool to be able to see that. And I'm impressed too, because I'm so intimidated by bottom up sweaters. I've made one once and I should have known better than to try to modify it my first time doing something bottom up. And I feel like I didn't do it justice. So I'll have to revisit that at some point. But yeah, that's truly, it's really beautiful. And
I'm so excited about this. It'll be really interesting to see when we're done how it looks different on all of our different body shapes and much different from the model, because in the pattern, I think it might have been from a Japanese publication. The woman is very petite and very thin. And it is just straight down. There's no shaping, and has so much ease on her that you can't like see any of her body. Like you can't see her breasts or her hips or anything like that. And I'm not making it with that much ease because that's my choice.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting, but I'm loving. It's really simple, easy, memorizable lace. So that's really fun. I'm loving the yarn. It's so soft and it's softening up as I knit. So that's my first project. And I'm showing you all the projects I'm really excited about right now.
Cool. Yeah, I know that's like what people are here for. So it's all about the yarn and the knitting.
Yes. And then my next project is a crochet granny square sweater, and I have been working on this a lot, and it's taking
squares
forever. They're fairly large, so this is the size of one of the granny squares, so they're about 4x4, I would say, and my size requires, I think, 90 or so. And I am 2/5 of the way through them, and I'm loving it. But it is a half hour a night, every night. I just devote a little bit of time to it because I am not a great crocheter. I can't crochet without looking. So that is definitely something that's different than my knitting. And
well, it looks great to me. I don't know how to crochet. It's on my to learn list. It looks really beautiful.
I'm really excited about it, but I just have to say, I've seen a lot of people, I've seen at Target and a lot of people talking about the granny square cardigans that are on sale at Target right now. And I saw somebody talking about how it took them 17 minutes to knit a garter square. That person is an amazing crocheter because it takes me a half hour to do the outer border and then sew in the ends.
Yeah, that's great perspective. I think I saw that the reel or whatever on Instagram too, and they were doing the math of, what should it cost essentially, not including materials and
right.
Not including like, I guess, the expertise quotient of what you pay someone for being an expert at something. And I have no idea, as someone who doesn't crochet, like how long would it take to make a square like that? But I can see right away, well, there's multiple colors. So you're managing that, different yarns. And then there's what looks like different stitch types. So it's already like, that's not something that somebody just whips out, right? And
oh my gosh,
sells for $35 on Etsy. It's clearly like an exploitative thing.
Oh my gosh.
Charging it, or to be selling something for $35. And yeah, it's wow. I know crafters are like, our blood pressure just collectively went up when we see those.
I know. And it's like, okay, machine knits, we understand that it's put into a computer program. Somebody like loops the yarn on the initial time and then the machines go for it. Right. So like you can see how, it's still fast fashion. So it's really exploitative at some point in the supply chain, but it's not an actual person knitting all of those stitches on it. So yeah, it's crazy, but they're really in style right now. So I needed one and I saw it and I didn't buy it as the kit, I don't think, from Lyons brand, but I used the recommended yarn that the designer, and I'll have to email you because I don't remember who the designer is or the specific name of the pattern. But I am using Lyons brand New Boo yarn. So it is 100% lyocell, and lyocell is a derivative of bamboo. So it feels really cool and silky to the touch. So I think it'll be something nice to wear in the spring and the summer that's not going to make me too hot. So I'm looking forward to that, but I have a lot of work to go still on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have had some garments that were made with like lyocell or tencel or like other bamboo fibers, and they are really cool to the touch. It's really interesting how it has that like soft like yarn feeling, And so, but then it feels like really, like, yeah, like it's a completely different temperature experience. And I'm using knitting with something from the fiber company that has that blended with other fibers. And it's shiny too. It's like, it just gives it like a really nice luster.
Yes, absolutely. And I was a little bit worried about this. I don't know that I would knit. I would just be careful with something that I knitted with this, because with crochet, it's knots. So I feel like it's less likely to unravel. Where for me, I think I would probably, if I were knitting something, I would just literally tie a knot and let the ends hang on the inside of the garment, because I would be worried about it unraveling if I didn't do like a really secure knot and just tried to weave in the ends.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've got many a granny square here, and I have quite a few more to go, but I do it. I've been working a half hour on it every night, and hopefully that's going to get me there.
Yes. It's so satisfying to see them all like a deck of cards, or like, you know, money.
Yeah. And I have them all in this little bag. So maybe you can get a good view on the inside of how many I have. So I have quite a few, but like I said, that's only 2/5 of the ones I need to get done. So it's still going.
Okay. Well, you know, yeah, slow making. So what is your favorite thing that you've ever made? And on the flip side, I guess, if you have any epic fails, we'd love to hear about that too.
Yes. So I don't know that I have a favorite thing that I've ever made, because anything that's my newest is probably my most favorite thing that I've made. I do have a most worn thing. Can we pause for 1 minute? I'm going to go upstairs and grab it. It was one of those I forgot to grab. I'll go grab it. Okay. So I brought one of my favorite, it's not the most favorite, but it's one of the most favorite things that I wear. It's not looking so great right now because I wear it all the time. So this, I'm going to kind of move back. This is the Volition cardigan, and it is by Lyons. She is probably my favorite knitting instructor. I've taken a class with her at Stitches West, and she does sweater classes. So this is the second sweater I made with one of her sweater classes that she has links to every single technique embedded in the pattern. So I think it's a more expensive pattern, maybe $20 or $25, but worth every penny. I love her sense of humor, and I love her technical knowledge. When she talks about a technique, she describes the why and the how it works in terms of the knitting. So this was a knit along that you could either make a sweater or a cardigan. And I made this open front cardigan because I kind of learned I don't love a button front cardigan. It's just not really as I'm wearing a button front cardigan.
Yeah. Well, you know.
It's not really my style. And I always feel that I need to make it extra large so that it doesn't gape in the front where the buttons come together at my bust.
Oh yeah, that happens to everyone. I feel like all sizes, everyone has that. Yeah, and if the buttons are small too, I feel like, or they're not spaced just so or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I end up making a bigger size than I really need. And then maybe it's not quite as flattering. So I enjoy an open front cardigan because I can put it on over a dress or whatever I'm wearing. And then when it gets warmer, I can take it off and it's no big deal. So yeah, this.
So pretty. I love the color.
Yeah. And I bought it. I think it's some sort of Webb's House brand. It's like a wool, might be a wool mohair nylon, or maybe a wool mohair or Angora nylon, something like that. But you had a bunch of choices. So I chose to do this as my rib for the front and the neckband. And I love it. I can't say enough good things about it. I wear it all the time. It's held up pretty well considering the amount of wear it's gotten. And I just think Patty Lyons is an amazing knitting teacher, and I would highly recommend investing in taking one of her classes. I learned so much from her.
That's good to know. Okay, do you have any like epic knitting fails or like something that you made that you're just like, I don't like this, I don't know why I made it?
Oh, totally. And I think as I've gotten older and more mature in my knitting, I figured out what I will and I won't wear. So now if I'm not going to wear it, I'm not going to knit it. There are so many cool, pretty things I see on Ravelry or Instagram, and they're gorgeous, but I know myself well enough now to know that I won't wear it, where before I did not. I went out in the garage actually this morning and was looking for my biggest fail. And I think I must have finally just accepted defeat and said goodbye. So I'll just tell the story. So back in the early days of knitting, I think it was probably around 2003 or 2004, I saw this sweater at a department store, and it was 2 layers of mohair. And one was like just plain knit, and the other one that was on top was a cable on top of it in a different color. It was gorgeous. And I thought, and it wasn't even that expensive. I was so excited about knitting. I thought, I can make that. So I said, I'm going to make that. And I went to my LYS and said, I told them what I wanted to do. And they were like, okay. So they sold me like hundreds of dollars of Rowan, what is their mohair called? Whatever the Rowan mohair is. Okay. And this was 20 years ago. So what's it called? And they sold me a pattern. And I don't know, this is the pattern. I kept it all these years because I might make it again. I didn't know about gauge. Nobody told me anything about gauge. And now that I'm looking at the picture, I don't know, this looks like this is probably DK or worsted weight. And I was knitting in kid silk haze. That's what Rowan's.
Yeah, like lace weight mohair.
Yeah.
This will work.
And it turned out, I just kept going. I just kept going, following the pattern. Like you can see, I circled all of my numbers here on the pattern. I just kept going, finished the whole thing. And it was like this wide. And it was so shapeless and so terrible. And that was only the first layer, right? Because I was going to knit the second layer with the cables. And it was the biggest fail, but it's because I didn't know. I didn't understand anything about gauge. I didn't understand about yarn choice other than I chose the yarn that looked like the one I saw in the shop, but it was totally inappropriate to the pattern. Oh, and I held on to it.
Yeah. Like every new knitter goes, well, this is pretty. I like this pattern. I like this yarn. And I saw somebody wearing something that looks good on them, and and then
yes,
try to find that together.
Yeah, I had no idea. So, and I kept that sweater in a like a plastic tote box and moved it from house to house as life progressed, because I couldn't let go of it. But I must have in the last 5 or so years gotten rid of it, because I went and looked for it in the garage and it wasn't there anymore. But I found the pattern because I kept that.
Just the fact that it would have been living in the garage, I think, says a lot. Okay, so I want to ask you, so what was it like to learn to knit in the early 2000s when you started knitting, kind of again as an adult? What resources were available, and what was just, what was your learning experience?
Yeah, it was a totally different than knitting now. There, first of all, was no knitting community unless you maybe had a LYS or some sort of knitting group that you met with. So I was knitting by myself on an island and figuring it all out as I went along. And for me, that had pluses and minuses. I love math, so I'm really comfortable with having to recalculate the gauge or something. Obviously, I hadn't learned that lesson here, but I had figured out as early as my second scarf that this is what I was looking for. And these were the skills I had. And I knew how to knit just like flat up and down. So I knit a bunch of scarves and blankets. And then I took a class from my local yarn store and I learned how to make socks. And I still have them. The cast on is looking a little shady, so I haven't been wearing them, but these are the socks. And I think these are from, 2003, maybe 2004. So I took, and I don't even know if there was a pattern. I feel like the lady at the yarn store, I paid and now that I'm thinking about it, all I can think is what a bargain, because I think I paid $20 or $30 for the lesson. So, and the lesson was, I bought the materials, double pointed needles, and I did the rib. And she said, okay, now you're going to go home and you are going to knit 5 inches of the cuff or whatever it was. And then you come back. And then I came back and she said, okay, here's how you do the heel flap. And then I did it on one, and then I went home and I did it on the other, and then you come back. And I mean, to pay $20 or $30 for a private lesson on how to do a sock. Yeah. And then you knit the foot, and then you come back, and then you do the toe. So these are my first socks. And I can see looking here that the pickup on that heel flap does not meet my exacting standards these days, but I am still pretty proud of these socks. I've obviously held on to them for a really long time because it meant something to me and it was a big deal. I feel like this really leveled up my knitting game, because after I learned how to knit socks, then I could knit hats, because before I was crocheting hats because I didn't know how to knit in the round.
Okay. Yeah.
Because nobody was there. I didn't have any resources. Nobody was there to teach me how to knit in the round. I had the long needles, but I didn't understand that could be made into the round. I just thought that was for a long blanket.
Yeah, that was me too when I was a beginner. And I think, today I think though you can Google things, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward 20 years, we can Google things. We can find a video of somebody demonstrating a technique or explaining what something means. And like you were talking about, like Patty Lyons has classes you can sign up for online and you can learn from an expert. So that wasn't around back then. It was sort of more silent.
Yeah. And if you had an LYS, you were lucky. If not, you were going to Michael's or Joanne or Ben Franklin or whatever like hobby store you had and learning out of a pamphlet. And like I said, these were the actual patterns that they did have booklets. They had like some magazines and then maybe like a Rowan booklet or a Cascade booklet at the store. And the stores were like, Rowan would be their highest end yarn. They would have Sirdar, maybe Pattons, like a variety of levels of that, anywhere from like a bamboo cotton blend. They had full acrylic up to full wool, and then Lamb's Pride. And then when I first started knitting, I don't remember there being any hand-dyed yarn. And then these were the literal patterns. And this has a glued on photograph.
Yeah.
It's not even a colored copy. It's a glued on photograph. And I don't know if everyone sold these or these were just what was available in my area, because this is from Knitting Pure and Simple. Okay. And it's from Truckee. So that's pretty local to me. And then they had these same patterns at the LYS when I was in grad school, but that was in Northern California. So I feel like maybe it was a California thing.
So you would have had pattern designers who then were maybe reaching out to their local yarn shops, which I think to some degree people still do this, but now they also have all these other ways of like disseminating their work. And so it was sort of like you would go to your local yarn shop and what you had was what you had. And it was what was local or what was maybe like, you mentioned like Rowan and Sirdar and like commercial yarn brands, or like, you know, kind of bigger companies. So you had sort of the big companies. Do you feel like the patterns that were available back then were very, like, did they depend on you kind of being able to figure things out, or did they kind of hold your hand and walk you through, here's how you do this cast on and then, you know, proceed to the next step?
Oh, they did not hold your hand at all. So like here it just says beginning at the neck edge with larger 24-inch circular needle, cast on firmly 2 stitches, place a marker, and then continued on. So this is like, this is the entirety of a pattern for a cardigan. So it just say place buttonholes, and you have to figure out like how to place the buttonholes. And like I said, I feel like it made me a better knitter because I had to figure it out myself. And I love math, so I wasn't too intimidated on having to figure it out by myself. But if you don't fundamentally understand how math works, and it's like, oh, I need to place 6 buttons and then I divide by 6. Well, you're going to end up not having a button. Like you're going to be short one button if you do that. So you have to understand how to like leave some room for that. And if you can't visualize it, or if you can't do the math easily, it's so hard.
Yeah. So like on the one hand, I feel like, and maybe, you know, let me know if you agree. I think if you don't tell people too much information, they'll figure it out and they won't actually be so afraid to try new things because they're used to not being told step-by-step instructions. But then on the other hand, I feel like, you know, just with buttonholes, you could make a really funny mistake. Like for me, like my first thought on that would be like, oh, take the total space, divide it by 6. But of course you want your top and buttonholes to actually be closer to the edges than the others. So, you know, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, how much is too much information, and creates sort of more, I guess, distance between, you know, newbie and expertise, and then what's the right amount to help people kind of along the learning path, I guess?
I think it's so hard to say. I personally think that the knitter needs to have like a lot more control of their decisions and be able to figure it out. I'm shocked every time I see something on Instagram about a designer saying that they've had people complaining. Like, I guess I figure like they did their job. Like it's my job to like read the instructions and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like if knitters are told less, they'll learn more and be able to take that knowledge going into the next project. Where if the designer or the pattern step by steps everything, I don't think the knitter ends up learning anything. And I mean, they're going to learn better stitch execution because they're going to have practice, but they're not going to learn any skills that are going to allow them to actually become more independent or to be able to make modifications or make something for themselves, like just design from scratch if they want to, if they don't have that skill because it's been spoon fed to them the whole way.
Right.
I mean, but it really depends on, I think, why the person is knitting. And so if you're just knitting because you enjoy it and you just like the meditative, repetitive nature of it, that's a valid reason to be knitting. And so for you, you might not care about acquiring skills, but there's other people who have, goals or aspirations with regards to their knitting that do want to level up their skills.
Yeah. So what advice would you give knitters who, I mean, like me, kind of grew up or came of age in knitting in this world where you have Ravelry and you have YouTube and it is sort of like, you do have access to all the things, right? But what advice do you have for like when access isn't enough, I guess, or like just building our own skills?
If you can learn how to read your knitting, that is number one thing, because if you can go back and the pattern's going to tell you this is the pattern. If you can count back and say, oh, it said knit 1, purl 2, yarn over, knit 2 together. If you can follow the pattern and see, then that opens up. If you can understand how the stitches are created and that a knit 2 together is going to lean this way versus a knit, slip knit, which is going to lean this way. If you can figure that out and be able to read your knitting, and it doesn't even have to be by a mistake. If you just pay attention and see what it looks like on the row below, it makes a huge amount of difference. And same thing, so you don't have to count your rows like as you go, that you don't have to use a tally mark. If you can tell, oh, that's where the yarn over is. So on that, what is that? The sweater I'm working on by Justyna Lorkowska, the repeat is a 16 stitch repeat, but I could count from where my yarn over was and count how many stitches I've done above that yarn over. So I don't actually have to like keep track in terms of writing the tallies or anything like that, because I'm able to read my knitting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cool. I think that is the most valuable skill. And also don't be intimidated by the math. If you do need to adjust something, it's basic algebra and everybody has the math ability. Sometimes I think people lack the confidence, but I feel like everybody has the ability that they would be able to do that basic math, to be able to add a repeat if needed, or to be able to go up a size or size in between, unless it's a really complex, stitch pattern that it's a 14 stitch pattern and it's not that you're kind of stuck with a multiple of 14, but anything else, you should be able to go ahead and add some stitches or decrease out some stitches, or be able to add the waist shaping if that's something you want.
Okay. So I guess like louder for the people in the back, everyone can do basic math.
100%. Absolutely. It's one of my pet peeves when I hear people say, I can't do math. It's like, yes, you absolutely can. Yeah. You absolutely can do the math that's required to adjust a knitting pattern. So yes.
Yeah, I know. And I feel like I'm one of those people that it's like, I often feel like, oh, I don't want to do that math. But then the second I sit down to do it, I'm like, this is so easy. I don't know why. It's like, you don't want to put your clothes in the washing machine. You don't want to,
yes.
You don't want to fold them once they're clean, but you can totally do it. And it's not hard and it doesn't take long. You just
100%. And it's completely valid to say, I don't want to, because for me, my journey as a knitter has changed because there were no resources. So I had to math it out. I had to write my own patterns from scratch. I had to take a pattern and adjust the gauge. So I had to do that. And that was okay because I had the brain space for that. But things have changed in my life in the last 20 years. And I have 2 kids and a job, and they have activities now. So for me, I do appreciate a well-written pattern that I don't have to do the work on, because sometimes I'm just tired, and that's not how I want to spend my 1 hour of free time a day I have, is doing the math. I just want to do the knitting sometimes. So yeah. I do like a well-written pattern as well.
Yeah. Okay. So what about like when, how have you seen, because you kind of touched on how yarn stores were different. What is kind of like the broad trends and changes you've seen in the industry with regard to, I guess, yarn stores, and then also, just like yarn that's available, books and patterns that are available, fiber festivals, what have you, all the things that we are lucky to have at our disposal today and resources. How have you kind of like witnessed that change, and what has it been like for you as somebody who learned to knit in a sort of you know, I guess I think you said like on an island, in isolation, more independently, we'll say.
Yeah. So in terms of the yarn, I was lucky that I had a LYS in my town. And like I said, they carried the big brands, and they carried what I would call a big brand of Lamb's Pride. So everything was superwash wool, a lot of acrylic or Lamb's Pride, which is a non-superwash that you could make a sweater for, but I feel like more often it's used for felting. And I think they might have expanded their range as well. And I feel like that was the same situation of the things that I had available at the LYS in the town I went to grad school in. So pretty similar there. And then I feel like it was probably around 2008, 2009, maybe, that I started to see hand-dyed yarns be a thing. And those were, they would have been like a sock yarn usually, or a superwash merino. And the ones that I remember being some of the first ones I saw, and once again, it could be because where I live in America, were Lorna's laces or socks that rock, that it would be the circular skein, and that you'd have like one color here and the other color here. And if you knit them as socks, they'd micro stripe or they'd pool, or socks that rock would have like 5 different colors, but you could see how it was in the circular skein, right? And then I remember when Jimmy Beans put out a publication of Madeline Tosh, and it was like, wow. Because even Jimmy Beans at the time, I remember they had Lorna's laces. That was like their big indie dyed, but it was still mainly like Cascade and those type of things. And then they had, and that must have been closer to like 2010, I would guess. They put out a big thing about, they used to send out like print magazines, and it had all of these Madeline Tosh colors, which were like so beautiful, so deep, so rich, and totally different from the like circle skein pooling method that like the previous hand dyers were doing. And now it's moved more, I feel like, in the direction of Madeline Tosh. Like I very, very see those variegated, like this color here, hand dye techniques. It's either like a tonal hand dye technique, or like more of like inspired by hedgehog fibers with the speckling technique.
Did they kind of create that or start that trend?
They were the first, and I'm just speaking for me, they were the first brand that I saw that were more like speckled like that. So I would say they created that trend, and then other people followed suit. But now you go into an LYS, and I would say at least half of the store is hand dyes, right?
Easily. Yeah.
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 So half of the store is hand dyes, and then they have like a small corner that might not even be on display. You might have to ask of something that's acrylic or cotton or something like, you know, on the lower end of the price scale. But one of the other things I have noticed that's great is that there's been more wool that's not necessarily just superwash wool. Yeah. Because I have a love-hate relationship with superwash wool.
Don't we all? Yeah, I think when I was a brand new knitter, I just saw all those beautiful colors, because I started in like late 2015, really like December of 2015, so almost 2016, and I just saw all those beautiful colors and was immediately pulled in by like, well, why would I buy this like solid color thing when I could get this thing that's so unique and artistic? But then of course you knit it up, and yeah, superwash, it can grow, it can pill, it can do different things that, especially when you don't really understand like what the purpose of this sock yarn is, even though it says sock in the name.
Yeah.
Sock Rhiannon, it's for socks, but you know, so yeah, I totally get that. But it is so also just the way it takes the dye, I think, is what brings us back every time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are intimidated about hand washing, or think that if it says hand wash, you can't use the washing machine. Most washing machines have a delicate cycle, and I've never had a felting occur on the like delicate cycle. It's anytime anything's felted, it's been my own fault. So like it wasn't the washing machine, but also it is more time intensive. Like you have to set aside a time that you're going to be able to wash it, and then you're going to be able to squeeze it out, and then you're going to be able to have to like lay it out, and it's going to be able to need to lay out for many hours. So, you know, it's a process as well with the non-superwash. So,
yeah.
But in terms of the way that patterns and designers have changed, that is been the biggest change. So when I was first started knitting, you got like a leisure arts pamphlet from, you know, Joann's or wherever you bought your thing. And they'd have some books, and they definitely had like knitting magazines that were, you know, monthly magazines. But those patterns are nothing like, and it's just so text rich. There'll be a picture on the front or like in the magazine, and then in the back you have your patterns, and it's like 3 columns of text, and oh, in the middle of that page it starts a new pattern. So it's really just, you know, difficult because it's just so text dense and difficult to kind of parse out what you need to be able to do. To then these types of patterns, and I would say around the time that I was buying these is when the Stitch and Bitch books came out, and that first Stitch and Bitch book changed my knitting life. I was knitting before that, and I was obviously enough into it that my cousin, who worked at a TV station, knew I was into it. And when Debbie Stoller, I guess, came to their TV station to do an interview, I don't know, my cousin brought me a book, that first Stitch and Bitch book, and I read that book cover to cover. I learned so much. It was the first time I had seen like the diagram of a knit stitch versus a purl stitch.
Right.
And there was an explicit discussion on gauge and what it meant.
Oh,
and
yeah,
wow. Like it was amazing to me. Any other thing I had seen was just the patterns, and it maybe listed the gauge at the front, but I didn't know what it meant. So reading that book opened up a whole new level of knitting for me. It was amazing. And I think I knitted almost every single pattern in that original book. She had a sewing pattern for a needle holder. I made that. I actually still have it. I made it out of a canvas and then like a quilting cotton on one side. So like all my straight needles are still in there. That I feel is when knitting like got more popular and people were doing it and maybe talking about it. I didn't feel like I couldn't knit in public anymore because like,
yeah.
I didn't want to be too much of a weirdo. Here's this girl in her 20s who's like knitting, like, yeah. Oh no, what's wrong with her?
Yeah, people are so weird about that. And it's funny because I feel like by the time again that I learned to knit, that was starting to go away. But there was still sort of like, you know, well, you don't knit when you go out with non-knitter friends. Like, and now I just kind of tell people like, I'm going to knit, you know, it's going to happen. It's not that I'm not listening to you. I'm actually listening better because I'm using my whole brain instead of just part of it, you know? But yeah, it's funny how that it still is like, oh, you knit? Oh.
Yeah. And yeah, so it's just that changed. And at the same time, there were some sock books that were pretty cool that came out. And I feel like before it was like books, and maybe online pattern. You could get something on Knitty here. And now it's like books are down here for the most part. And I'm probably going to buy 95% of my patterns online.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because so many of those magazines that you had, I subscribed and there was one pattern I wanted, or
yeah, and I definitely have like knitting books where I've bought it and I'm like, I'm totally going to make these at least 3 patterns from this. And then there's one I know that I've never made anything from. And it's still in contention, but like it's made me not want to buy so many books because I feel like if I'm not going to actually, especially the ones that are just patterns and not like lessons or tutorials and things.
Yeah. I feel like at this point, unless it's something that I really, really, really need / want, I'm probably just going to buy the single pattern if it's available. And I'm just trying to declutter a little bit. So all of my knitting books take up space. Either they're on shelves taking up space, or they're in the garage taking up space, or they're in a closet taking up space.
Yeah. Okay. So, something I've been thinking about, so this is a purely selfish question, but something I've been thinking about because I recently relocated is how where you live impacts like the kinds of things you knit. And so, you know, when I was in Portland, I could maybe get away with knitting a DK weight sweater. And that would be like the heaviest sweater I would wear. And, you know, even then those sweaters are like 3/4 sleeves. And then sorry. No, that's okay. So my question is, you know, so you're in Nevada.
Yes.
Okay. And it's like kind of cold there, but it's not like blizzard, snowstorm, you know, and I feel like so much of the knitting world is kind of geared towards winter knits or, you know, very cold weather knits. So what, you know, how has like just geography affected your knitting or your knitting choices?
And once again, I think I've grown more into accepting where I actually live and what I'm going to actually want to wear, because man, some of those chunky, bulky sweaters are so cute, but I've made them and they don't get worn because it is sweltering. Like, I would say, once again, I agree. The warmest, thickest I'm going to knit these days is a DK cardigan or sweater. So this is a DK cardigan here, and I'm at the like maximum comfort level of heat. I've made mittens before. What was I thinking? Like, there is no use for mittens. I mean, I wear mittens maybe for 10 hours over the whole winter, unless I'm skiing, but then I'm wearing not knitted mittens. I'm wearing, you know, technical mittens. So I feel like you have to come to grips and accept where you live, because you see things that are gorgeous, but then in reality, it's like, I am not going to be comfortable wearing that. I'm never going to wear that. And once again, I have things that I've kept because they were special. I spent a lot of money, or they were special. That's really, but they don't get worn. I have a whole tub of special knitting. It doesn't get worn. And even with that, like things for my kids, I don't knit for them that much because it's too special and it doesn't get worn. And they go to a school that wear uniforms anyway. So it's like, we have 2 days a week that there's a potential for knitwear. And they're not wearing the hand knit sweater to the skate park.
Right.
Like,
yeah. So do you, are you primarily I hate the term, but I use it anyway, selfish knitter?
Definitely. Yes. Yeah. One of my actual knitting goals for this year is to give more gifts, because I need to like say goodbye to some yarn that is in my stash. So I'm going to really try to make more gifts, but I think it's just natural that I see that and I'm like, oh, I really want that. That's so beautiful. I could see I'd make it in pink and gray, like, you know, my colors, I'd make it in pink and gray, be so pretty. And then it ends up for me. So, yeah. And that's okay. My husband will wear hand knit sweaters. Excuse me. I did not say that. He will never get a hand knit sweater because his specifications are too exacting, and it would just not be good for our relationship when my sweater I made him wasn't good enough. But he will wear hand knit socks, and recently one of them had a hole in it and he gave it back to me to darn. So I was really thankful that he didn't just like sneak it into the trash or pretend it was fine and then lose it or something like that. So, so I'll make him socks. I'll make my mom socks. I'll make the kids. They really do like their hand knit socks, but in terms of sweaters, they don't gravitate to them and it's too hot for them. So it's not something that I do. I made them in some knitted toys, and when we go through the toys, that's always like the first toy that they want to get rid of. And it just breaks my heart.
Oh, yeah. I think there's nothing worse than giving a gift to an ungrateful, or, you know, someone who doesn't really appreciate like what went into it. And I think, yeah, that's something we all have to learn on our journey, is our comfort level with gift knitting, and like, you know, how we want to approach that, and who is knit worthy in our lives, and what kinds of things we're going to be willing to make for others. But so it sounds like you're like a sock expert.
I'm not an expert, but I've knit a fair few pairs of socks. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you just showed us a pair of socks from the early 2000s and said, this isn't up to my standards. And I was looking at it thinking, I would be really proud if I made that today. Like I've been knitting socks for a year. And so that looks really good to me. So I think you're a sock expert.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I actually wear my knitted socks regularly in the winter. So I don't knit any DK socks or anything like that because they're not going to be worn. So I will knit wool nylon blend socks because I can put them in the washer and they're going to hold up pretty well. So that's my go-to for sock knitting.
Okay. Let's see. I want to ask some kind of rapid fire questions, I guess. So do you have a favorite technique?
I like a two-stitch cable or a twisted stitch situation. I like lace. I honestly don't have a favorite technique. I like all the techniques. I love the look of cables, but they can be big cables, but they can be a little bit tedious to do. So that might be lower on the list of technique.
What is your favorite yarn to knit with?
Anything that's wool is probably going to be my go-to, and it doesn't necessarily have to be merino. I've actually found that I prefer a non-merino sock yarn because those merino sock yarns are really, really pill. They're super beautiful and so soft to knit with, but they pill and they don't hold up as well. So I prefer a wool nylon sock blend, but wool typically is going to be my go-to.
Do you have a favorite needle or tool?
I do. So I've been knitting for a long time, and I think that maybe my favorite is because that was what was available to me when I first started knitting, but I love the Addi Turbos. Those are my go-to needles. So let me just show you a couple so you can all get a laugh. So the sweater, the Zoraya sweater I'm knitting on, I am knitting on a pair of Addi Turbos, and I've had these for many years, at least a decade, if not longer. And they are well loved. I don't know. Can you see the dent. Oh, there we go.
I can't. Oh, okay, like in the like shaft of the needle.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but they've been well used. These are my favorite needles. The Addi Turbos are fairly blunt, but they're nickel plated and they are really slick and I love them. And they really have a good exchange. I've exchanged some that have like broken here, but I have Addis that have lasted for 20 years. So those are definitely my favorite. And then they have a fairly new product, which are my new favorite sock knitting needles, which are these. I just cast on I haven't even fully cast on, but these are the Addi FlexiFlip needles. And they're like, I'm going to push the yarn down. They're like double point needles, but they have like a tiny nylon in the center. So,
hey, I've heard of these, but I didn't really know like what they were. So
they are my favorite sock needles now because they kind of combine the magic loop, but you don't have the extra space of the loop.
Right.
And I like them better than a double point because a double point, you have to spread over 4. So you have 4 places that the yarn, I mean, you can spread it over 3, but for me, I don't like the math of spreading it over 3. So you spread it over. Yeah, that's me.
But
yeah,
you could do that math.
Yes, you can. I just don't like it. So you end up with like 4 places that you could have like a ladder or something. But with these, you use 3 needles instead of 5. And then you end up with kind of your circular, like I said, I haven't even made the whole cast on yet. But you end up with your circular sock and then you knit across one, you drop it, you pick up the other. And so I really, really enjoy these. These are definitely my favorite now for sock knitting.
Yeah, and definitely I can see that compared to a standard double pointed needle, it's not going to slide off. You don't have to worry about that if it's in your bag or whatever.
Yeah, because you kind of just push the stitches toward the center and it just naturally holds it on there. I love these. If I had to pick one like absolute favorite, it would be these.
Cool. Okay. What's your ideal balance of works in progress? Like how many would you have and like what kinds? Are you a monogamous knitter?
I'm definitely not a monogamous knitter. I think I have like 15 whips going and I'm pretty good about putting them into Ravelry. So like I can see how many whips I have. And some get pushed back because I'm enjoying them less than others. And then I have knitting that's like my go out knitting, not like I'm going out anywhere special, but like I'm going to soccer practice that I need to keep an eye on my kids, but it's some downtime that I'm going to be sitting. So I want to have a fairly simple project that I'm not going to have to refer back to my pattern all the time. So I can pay attention, to whatever I'm doing. And then I like to have one that's a little more difficult that I do have to pay attention to. And maybe I do need to refer to the chart. So just like for different times when I'm like on a weekend and I'm awake and I have my knitting time, I want to work on something maybe a little more challenging than, while I'm watching the basketball practice or the basketball game. Mm-hmm. So currently, always I would say I have a sweater for myself, always on the needles. I always have at least 1 pair, if not 2 pairs of socks. Currently, I have 2 pairs of socks on the needles because one's a pattern sock, like a heavily patterned sock that I need to check the pattern. And one is a rib sock. Well, the one I just showed you is the start of a rib sock that I don't need a pattern for, that I could just knit and knit and knit. I try to have a gift going. So right now I have a crocheted blanket that I'm working on for a friend. I'd like to have something else, maybe another blanket or a shawl or something like that. But I like to have some variety.
Okay. So you're totally comfortable with having 5, 6 things on the needles at any given time.
Oh, totally. I like to have like my one project that's maybe like my priority project. So that's like the one that I'm going to knit the most on. And then all the rest are secondary and I can mix them in. But the priority project, I'm probably going to knit on every day.
Wow. Okay. How many, just out of curiosity, if you had to estimate, like how many of a thing do you knit in a given year? Like how many pairs of socks would be your average, do you think?
I know that I've knit 24 items total the last 2 years because I keep track of it on Ravelry and you can do the like challenge tab. Yeah. I don't know if you're still using Ravelry or if you see it. So I know I've knit 24 items. So I would say I probably have knit maybe 2 or 3 sweaters, like adult my size sweaters that were probably for myself every year. I'd say at least a blanket a year and then probably 8 pairs of socks. And then all the other stuff would be thrown in there. Hats, or last year I made fingerless gloves for like 3 friends that were all like the same but different. I used the same yarn, but I did 3 different patterns for those.
Gosh, yeah. I'm noticing like so many people right now are saying that they bit off more than they could chew with their knitting in the last year. And I think there was something about that like year or 2 of the pandemic that we all felt like we were going to knit so much. And now everybody's like, maybe I should knit monogamously. So it's really cool to hear somebody say like, no, I actually love having a lot of things on the go. And I love that I can have one thing that's a priority and then other things that are, that I take to practice, soccer practice or whatever. Yeah, because I'm sort of like, I don't know where I want to be, but yeah, that's.
And for me, I feel like I could never be monogamous because I need like some mindless knitting, but I also want to knit the thing that's really beautiful and intricate and uses more than one color. So, different, like just the different time periods that I have. But I can agree with a lot of the people that I feel like year 2 of the pandemic got me. I had been doing so well on using my stash and being a really mindful buyer. And then last year, at the end of 2021, we had some in-person events and I fell off the wagon and just bought a bunch of stuff because I was just smelling the yarn fumes and so excited to be out and about.
So I get it. It's so understandable. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like we miss our community.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know like the number one thing that I want to buy this year is I want to go to a fiber festival and discover something that's like hyper local that I would never hear about any other way. Mm-hmm. And buy that thing. Even, even if it's a single skein or even if it's like, I don't know what to make out of it. I want that experience again.
Yeah.
Now I want to do a really fun question. So this is my challenge that I'm going to do for everyone I interview. What is your strongly held knitting opinion? What is a knitting hill that you will die on?
A heel flap and gusset is far superior to any other heel construction technique.
What? So any other?
Maybe I haven't discovered it yet, but I feel like I've tried a whole lot of different, I've knit a lot of socks and I've done a lot of different heel constructions, and maybe it's just my foot because I know I have a high instep, but that heel flap and gusset fits better and wears better, and it never goes under your foot than any other sock. Let me just give you an example.
Great.
So the first of those socks that I was showing you is this one. Mm-hmm. And this one I actually did with an Afterthought heel. So the reason I did that is because I bought, this is the yarn ball. It is by Valkyrie Fibers, who is local to me. And I took it on vacation because it was already balled up and ready to go. But when you have the gobstopper, you don't have access to the other end. Because what I would usually do with the self-striping is I would pull from the other end and knit that heel flap with gusset with the other end so it doesn't break the stripe sequence.
I would have never even known that that was a possibility. Okay. But I totally understand why you would do that. Yeah. Because I did a heel flap and gusset with stripes, and then it messes
it up.
Kind of weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would have done that, but I didn't have access to the end, and I was on vacation and I needed just some easy peasy vacation knitting. So I just knit the whole sock. I didn't actually knit the whole sock. I knit to like here when I was done with my vacation. And then I came back and I put in the heel, and I actually tried a different heel this time. This is the heel, the Fork in the Road heel by Laura Neal. So I did that, but let's just look. No one we know has a foot that looks like that. Like, that's just not what people's feet look like. Like, I don't know, maybe if you like flexed it like this, it looks more footish. But even my old socks here, like, this is much more what your foot, in my opinion, at rest looks like, right? So it just makes more sense and it just fits better. This one, she specifically said, gives you a little bit of extra room in the instep, and it's a rib sock, so it'll have a little bit of extra room. But just doing like a short row heel, like any just like German short row heel or a Fish Lips Kiss heel, if it's just a stockinette heel, at least for me, it pulls so tightly on those stitches in the instep that they're pulled apart and look weird. Like, they look unsightly, in my opinion, on my foot, that it'll just be pulled so badly that you can see the ridges in between. And I've had them socks pull so tight from that, well, also if you wear like a slip-on shoe, like a Van or something like that, it's marked my foot.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's not good.
But that was probably also poor shoe choice. It just doesn't fit, in my opinion, as well. And I understand why you do it, because it doesn't interrupt the stitch, like the stitch count in the round, which a heel flap does. So you end up with more when you're decreasing for the gusset. So it would change the size of the stripes. So I understand why you wouldn't want to do that. And it is a little bit fiddly, and I think more technically difficult to do a heel flap and gusset than just doing a short row heel.
Yeah, I would have to say, as someone who's kind of new to sock knitting, my first sock had a heel flap and gusset, and I used the wrong needles. You know, there were a lot of things that were just not great about it, but my poorly executed heel flap and gusset fits better than my best Afterthought heel on another sock. So I think you're right. I think, I think, there's something for me. It's like, just, yeah, it's funny how I think that Afterthought heel is just a shortcut, and so it's like, you're taking a shortcut, you're not going to have the same results as if you did the heel flap and gusset. So you might choose to do it but it's sort of like going to a convenience store, right? Yeah. Like, it's about the convenience. It's not,
yes.
Getting the best deal on whatever you're buying. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's okay. There's a time for that. Like I said, I chose to take that yarn on vacation, so it would just be something easy and mindless for me to do while we were waiting in line or doing whatever.
Cool. Okay, so we're almost done with the interview. I want to ask you, do you have anything you want to promote?
I personally don't have anything I want to promote for myself, but you should definitely check out my sister-in-law, April. She runs the Lucy Link shop. She and I sometimes podcast together. She's had a really busy life for the last few months. But she sells stitch markers and hand sewn project bags. So check her out. She has some really nice, cute stuff. And, you know, I want to support my family.
Nice. Okay. And where can people find you and follow you?
So I am on Instagram as Zochi Knits, and I am on Ravelry as tahoegurl with a U. So Tahoe, TAHOEGURL. I should probably spell Zochi for those people who aren't Mexican and don't know how to spell that. Zochi is XOCHI knits, KNITS. Zochi Knits on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we'll include that down below. And I guess I'll just end by saying, you know, Addi FlexiFlips, sponsor her because
yes,
you have already made a sale from just this conversation. So, and you're probably going to make more. So that's my
yes, I will. I heard that they will like put your name on Addies if you're real special, but maybe I'll get a pair of Addies that have my name on them one day.
There you go. I know. I mean, I feel like, well, and honestly, seeing a pair of needles that's, you know, been around for a long time that you've been using continuously, I feel like that's just an ad in itself, right? Great.
Yes.
So, okay.
I'm happy with them. And the other thing I wanted to say, they do have a really good exchange policy. That I don't know how we're going to throw this. My LYS is Jimmy Beans. So they have taken back Addies that I know I didn't buy there because I don't think they were even a shop there, and returned them for me and got me new ones.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah.
So yeah, good local yarn shop customer service, and good customer service on Addies end too.
Nice. Okay. All right. Well, we will say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for doing this interview, for being my first guest. I am so glad that you said yes and that we made this happen.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.